Okay, let's get going here. The first three topics on the page, if you have this printout or what's going to be on here, first three topics are being postponed until December 5th because Dave Clark, who is doing some volunteer work this weekend, it feels these are important topics. He wanted to be involved, so he requested that they be postponed to the next session. So that's what I did. And if any of you, can't make it and feel it's a really good topic and you'd like to be involved and want to request postponement of the topic, I will do that. Nothing is set in stone except death and taxes, and death is questionable. So, anyway, we're going to start out today with a fun topic. And Darren's going to join us too. This is going to be a good group. Morning, Darren. No audio. Are you with us, Darren?
Yes.
Yes, you're with us. Okay, cool. Okay. Anyway, so our first topic today is, should knowledge be given only to those worthy of it? Does this apply to your art or ruse? Should there be secret techniques that only for advanced students? Is the mysticism of upper rank requirements or techniques an asset or detriment? Who gets the densho of your ru if there is one? Do you have any preconditions for allowing students in your class? Morning, Briston.
Morning, Sensei.
Has modern technology usurped the ability to restrict the flow of knowledge? And the last one is, have you read the James Burke's book entitled Connections? Okay. Which actually changed the way I taught history at school. Mm-hmm. And it made it a lot easier for students to understand. And it can be applied to the martial arts as well. But anyway, so here's the general question. Should knowledge be given only to those worthy of it?
Yes.
Or do we do that? Or let me add another way. Do we do that in some sense by having a ranking system? Oh, I lost it. Okay. Anybody going to comment? Nobody wants to?
How about we go to
Just start talking.
It's the second one then first. Should there be secret techniques? Because that kind of implies what goes on with the first one. If there are any secret techniques, George, you haven't found me worthy enough to tell me yet. So I don't know about secret techniques.
There are probably two or three that I could know of, but I'll usually only teach them to black belts. I've done it for military, but how to easily break a neck and leave no marks. But
Good.
No, there really aren't any. I can't think. There are certain martial arts that have secret techniques that are quote unquote taught to only black belts.
Yeah.
But it depends. Within the Budoshin system, I don't think there are any secret techniques. If you know how the body moves,
right.
That's what you can do.
Well, then, sidestepping that one, I'll go back and take a shot at the first one. I don't think I think there are things that shouldn't be taught to some people, but I also think in many ways, just the fact that it takes so long and so much diligence to actually become proficient at things, most of the people that I wouldn't want to have the knowledge don't stick around long enough to learn it. Maybe effective.
Yes, I agree with you. And there have been students that, or people I have probably over the years, maybe 2 or 3 people, I simply have not allowed to even start the class because just in the manner of their conversation, or I mentioned this before, one person crossed out 3 or 4 things on the participant release.
Oh,
And I
okay.
said, I said, we have, it has to stay this way for, for the insurance coverage, et cetera. Plus I found there was a roll of rolled up quarters in his leather jacket that he had put on the table. I said, why is this jacket so heavy? And so with those 2 things in mind, I said, no, we can't have you in this program. Just go back to the city and get your money back.
Dante, I think that's where I would be. I'm just another dynamic for the question, but if we allow somebody to participate in the class, then I think that's our evaluation to allow them to be a part of the entire program. So when do we say at some point we would teach X amount of techniques, but then restrict certain techniques? I mean, I would restrict them from day one. If I didn't think that they were somebody, a candidate, whether the integrity, moral values, and an individual, why would I teach them anything?
Yeah. I mean, I said, I think the ranking system to some extent, or the time it takes to move up in rank, is a disincentive to those people who want quickie stuff, for lack of a better phrase. Um, um, I think the same problem occurs when you're teaching, 6 or 10 week self-defense classes. It comes down to, you can teach really effective techniques, but until the person practices them long enough so that they become automatic reactions, as Thomas inferred, they're useless. So I'd say if the person is patient enough to stick with the program, they're probably, and by then you've had a good chance to get to know them somewhat, they're a safe risk, for lack of a better phrase.
Let me mention something. I think, Chris, you just kind of implied that you've got students coming in and you can choose not to teach them. In the environment where I was teaching at a YMCA, I did not get that choice. If they signed up for the class, I had to teach them. Now, I would usually spend the first class that they were there, sitting off to the sidelines, talking with them, getting to know them. And there were a lot of times, not a lot, there were some times when it was clear this was not the class for them. And we had a BJJ studio only a few blocks away, and I'd give them the address and say, I think this is a better class for you. There was one student that insisted upon joining the class. I really did not want him in the class. So I did not do what I would normally do during class. Most of my students had been there long enough. They knew that sometimes we were going to do drills to the point where they were saying, please stop. At the end of the class, one of my black belts came up to me and said, you didn't want him here, did you? And he didn't come back. I mean, it just made it a miserable class. You don't want to do this because it's repetition over and over and over again. I just condensed a couple of years of training down into one class. This is what it's going to be like. He didn't come back.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been able to say, because I've been questioned once or twice on it by city people, and I simply say, I sent it back because he crossed, in essence, he is a potential safety hazard. He crossed out parts of the participant release or participant agreement, or his attitude was, and I tell him what the attitude was, and I say, it's your decision, but at this point, I consider this person to be a safety hazard. But the other side of the coin, what throws a wrench into the when I made the Budoshin Jujitsu Densho available, which are my notes, which most people can't understand anyway, I got flack from some top black belts and other organizations saying, how can you make this information so readily available? And my response was, do you know how much information there is out there online? On DVDs, it's just, to say the knowledge goes only to, the knowledge only goes to those that are worthy of it. If you're just talking about, okay, here's the Densho, or here's all my DVDs, or here's all this, or here's all that. As you said, Thomas, it's a matter of, do they have the patience to learn it?
Yeah.
And so a Densho or all the material itself, to me, is just information. It's like anything you do in life. Are you, if you're a medical doctor, were you patient enough to, bad pun, were you patient enough to continue on with your education to get your MD, medical doctor degree? Were you patient enough to, it comes down to, your own self. Are you patient enough to learn this stuff? And that to me is the key. And that's why I forgot who said, maybe it's the ranking system that thins people out. And by the time a person gets to brown or black belt, you know them pretty well. Chris, any words of wisdom or thoughts or?
Well, thoughts, yeah, I don't know if it's wisdom, but I'll start with a somewhat recent example. We've all probably had stuff like this many times over the years, but I think it was maybe about 6 months ago. I had somebody new start in class, seemed nice enough and everything. So we were working out. I went over a technique, and then I walk over, I'm walking around the dojo and I see him doing it, and I see him doing something like different. So I said, oh, what are you doing? And, it's not what I showed. He goes, yeah, he said, but, I think this might be better. And I said, oh, okay. Why do you think that? He goes, well, I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, can you show me? Yeah. And of course, he couldn't make it work, So I said, listen, watching something and mimicking it is only kind of the first level of beginning to understand how to do something. There's a lot of things that happen physically and mentally that can't be captured by a camera, not very easily anyway. And so if you just mimic the movements, you're only going to have a very surface, shallow understanding of the movement without really understanding what's making it work, other than the physical motion. So I actually took whatever he was doing and made it work. And then I explained why. And I never had problems after that. So I'm using that example because I do that, and traditionally, there was like you have bunkai, right? So you can learn a form, you can learn a kata, whether it's 2 movements or 50 movements. And if you don't understand the bunkai, somebody leaning over the wall, to your dojo in the old days, could visually see the movements and learn them and replicate them. But what they were seeing is kind of the same thing people do through the video. So those bunkai movements were oftentimes taught separately indoors or at night, specifically so people don't understand the application, you know, the real power of the movements that other people were able to replicate. And then you had things that would severely injure or kill people. And that was kind of the secret teachings, or the more precisely, the hidden teachings, which is okuden. And it wasn't, you know, from my experience and all that, it's not necessarily it's a secret technique. It's a secret application and understanding of probably techniques you've been doing for years. And so it was specifically designed that way, the visual part, the application part, and then the hidden part in those three phases. And that kind of took care of the watchers, the people casually passing through, and the people that stuck out and were able to establish themselves, you know, as trustworthy. The practical reason was also you don't want somebody to know the same things, you know, that you do, because then you'd have a disadvantage. So here at the dojo, I teach, well, I mean, I teach different techniques, but I teach the application a little bit differently to everybody. And it's a judgment call on my part, you know, so everybody can walk away happy knowing that they learned the same technique, but different people walk away with a different understanding. You know, so, and it's a judgment call because, you know, I look at their demeanor, their behavior, their intentions, and sometimes, you know, well, oftentimes it's not necessarily malicious. It's just everybody's in a different mental state. You know, that's what they come in with from the outside. But those people that make it to black belt and above, in fact, today, after this, I'm going to walk over and we have special black belt training. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. It's a whole different level of understanding of techniques that they've already done. But I do that privately in a separate group, and it's by invitation only. So that's kind of how I handle it. It somewhat follows the traditional method, but there is a judgment part. I forgot who it was that said that, you know, when they were teaching at the YMCA, but you know, we teach through the city too, you know, just like you, Sensei. So we don't have a choice of who signs up. I still have to teach them, but that's okay. I still teach them same technique. They just don't know what to do with it the same way as more experienced people. So it works out.
Yeah. I think part of the issue is that as a student moving up in rank, if you're a good sensei, you tend to develop an acquaintance with that students. You tend to know their personality and whatnot, and their learning ability and how they learn. I know with students, regardless of rank, if I see them setting up a technique incorrectly, I won't just let them do it. I will intervene and say, well, you know, try moving, you know, for example, a hand throw, they get all their fingers on the inside of the hand, and I'll say, you know, try to cut it down to 2. And you can probably, the technique will probably be more effective. I said, just try it. And because my goal is to get them to do the techniques properly. And the other part of jiu-jitsu training and some other martial arts is, if you're learning a technique, you learn a lot by having it done to you, because then you're not just relying on what the sensei has said or the observation of seeing someone do it or any of these other external factors, but you tend to, you know what the technique feels like if it's done properly. And if you see how your body is reacting to that, when you do the technique and you can visualize and you see how their body is moving, then you have a good idea of whether the technique is being effective or not. And it's, so I know there are some martial arts where you literally cannot do that without injuring your partner offhand. And there's some martial arts where you can do that. And then the other issue, if you're learning techniques, is how good is your uke? Because if you have an overly cooperative uke, you're not going to learn anything either. Because you need to know how much pressure or what you are doing physically. You need to feel it, because that's the key to learning, at least in jiu-jitsu or some traditional jiu-jitsu styles. And I know there's some systems where they do beautiful kata, and they can pre-arrange this and look like they just finished doing a movie. And have 200 takes to get that scene right. But they can't fight their way out of a wet paper bag if they're put in a random situation, because they haven't really developed a feel for the technique. But I think what we're trying to discuss here is, where do we as sensei make a judgment call, or can we, or what does worthy mean? Is a person worthy of learning this stuff?
Yeah,
I would like
perhaps.
I would like to say something, if I may, Mr. Kirby. A lot of things have been said regarding the concept about when, what, how, why are you teaching certain type of a martial arts system to your colleagues and our students? Almost 40 years ago, approximately, this is how long I have been studying martial arts. Excuse me. And I needed to do a research and understand what I was getting into it. I have a great deal of desire to understand the philosophy first, and I did my research, and I never forget the first encounter as an introduction class that I have from one of the instructors. Back then, this gentleman was working for the CIA, and I told him, hey, I'm here because I wanted to learn a martial art style, Kung Fu. And I was in a Taekwondo dojo. And he said, Carlos, we don't teach Kung Fu, but I can teach you Taekwondo. And I said, well, let's start. And from that point on, I learned my expectations, safety issues, liability issues, and all above. Throughout the years, I have had the most unique, exciting privilege to learn from many instructors coming from all kinds of walks and discipline. And I have been blessed to develop my own style by incorporating those techniques myself. During sparring classes, performances that I have had with colleagues or younger ranked students, I always respect and always keep in mind why it's so important to emphasize the techniques per se, so that you can defend yourself offensively as well, and enjoying the art the best way you can. Don't get me wrong. I have been in a situation where I have not necessarily say something to the student that he needed to control himself, and I have to just teach him in my own way, respectfully, to take control of the situation, because this is what it's all about. Respect, especially when you are carrying a higher rank and you have years of experience. And I try to bring myself into a very humble situation and demonstrate a model to others. So I'm hoping that I am responding some of these questions, or at least contributing to the responses from the panelists during this discussion, which I consider a very interesting topic. Thank you.
I'd like to weigh in on this, Sensei.
Go ahead.
I used to believe that training in jiu-jitsu consistently and, letting it get its claws into you, so to speak, would make you a better person. But I had a student prove me wrong. He was an exceptional student, and he had me fooled, and it turned out that he was, and I used to think I was a really good judge of character too. I'm a detective. I have to read people, but it turned out he was a narcissist. And once he showed me who he really was, I didn't train him anymore, because I didn't want him to, I feel like I'd be responsible for giving a child a weapon, because a child lacks the ethical sense of, what's right and wrong. This guy, he had very little to no empathy, and I didn't see it. And, it was like, and he was one of my main training partners too. So I felt like I was this sharpening stone for him. And, he misused what I taught him. And I feel extremely responsible for that. So I guess what I'm saying is I think a lot of times the things you pick up on the mat and the lessons you learn in jiu-jitsu help to make you a better person. But it can go the other way. You know, a lot of times you see these guys that they get an inflated sense of self-importance. Their ego gets inflated. And that might be just the trend on my side of jiu-jitsu. But I do have a question for Thomas Salander Sensei. What was it about this problem student that put you off, and why was BJJ a better fit for him?
They were looking for competition. They wanted to be superior, and there was definitely a vibe of, I want to come in here and be the #1 student because I can beat everybody else.
Mm.
Not faulting BJJ, it is a much more competitive sport than Budoshin. That sounded like a much better fit for him. It was not a good fit for our class. Our motto literally was, this is self-defense for the rest of us.
Yeah,
I like that. And I think, I don't call what I do BJJ. I call it jiu-jitsu. And if people ask me, I'll call it Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. That's one of the lineages that I have. I think anymore that old school Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and BJJ have split. So the people that train me, they would be considered more old school, self-defense oriented. Gracie Humaita lineage has always had one foot in the self-defense world and one foot in the competition world. But now, I think the community has shifted so far into the sport direction that it's a different art. I'm not happy with where things are going. They're unashamedly, using performance enhancing drugs, and they don't care. They're not even ashamed of it. And you don't see a sense of humility being instilled in them. And I just, I don't feel at home there anymore. That's not to say my instructors are very different. But, we do stay in the competitive world too, so when I bring my students there, it just doesn't seem like the same community, But that's about all I got.
Dojo personalities do change over time. Sometimes it's because of the student, sometimes it's because the instructor changes his approach. When I was a classroom teacher, if things worked in the classroom, I got bored. I don't like to be bored as a teacher, because students will pick up really fast if you're bored with what you're doing. Those minds really work picking up the subtleties of who you are as a sensei. And if they see that you are just going through the motions, then they will probably just go through the motions too. And that's about it. So when I was a classroom teacher, I change the way I teach every 3-4 years, just to make it a challenge for myself. And that's to me, that's part of being a good teacher, is to realize when things are not going as well as you'd like them to, and then you have to take a step back and say, what can I do to improve my teaching ability, which hopefully will attract and keep students. And that's, students will pick up on that. If they see that you're interested in doing a good job with them, they'll stick with you. And if they see that you're just, these are the techniques that are on the wall and we'll do them, and the sun still sets in the east, you're not going to, it sets in the west. The 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 students aren't going to stick with you. I just joking, I used to give pop quizzes about once or twice a week, and I'd always have 2 or 3 stupid questions in there. And one of them was true or false, the sun sets in the east. And there were kids, 12th graders, that would mark, put that down as true. And they'd realize, because I said it in such a confident manner, you believe the teacher. But how do you say, a dojo or school or a classroom's personality will change. Society changes. And as an instructor, you kind of have to go along with it to some extent. I can't teach as Seki taught. If he were alive and kicking today, he probably couldn't teach that way either. He would have been sued up the kazoo, fired, everything else that could have gone wrong. Because society has changed, and our rules of what we can do, even in a dojo, even after you sign a participant release, and all these other things, has changed. I don't even think Darren teaches the same way he did 10 years ago. Do you?
No, I'm sure I don't. I'm sure I don't.
Yeah, the world changes. But how do can we bring this topic to some sort of, what makes a person worthy of learning what makes a person worthy of really learning a martial art?
Can we go back to something that was said? I heard him say it, and that was the first time that we actually answered the question. Ethics. That's what you were talking about. You were concerned, Kristen, you were concerned about ethics, empathy specifically was the word you used. So start there. Without empathy, I don't want the person anywhere near me.
Right.
Yeah, I'd go with that. The person has to have the ability to feel.
Yeah.
Emotionally, intellectually, physically, any way you want to put it.
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but as I brought up last time, can the person responsibly handle a gun?
Can a person?
If that person, if you put a gun in that person's hand, can he handle it responsibly? And if he can, that's the personality type that we'd be looking for as a martial arts student.
Okay. I think you could say that with respect to almost any weapon.
Well, martial arts would be considered a weapon. They would have the
martial arts
ability.
would be considered. Yeah,
Okay. So it would have the level of a person's empathy would play into that,
right.
as well as other things.
I mean, kids learn at a very, of course, today kids probably don't know what matches are.
Right.
When I was about 3-4 years old, I crawled across a stove and got second some third degree burns on the palms of my hands. And after that, I've always had a very solid respect for fire. It was a learning experience. Can laugh at it now, but at the time it wasn't funny. But and most young people know that you can cut yourself with a knife. And so they'll respect a knife. A gun, unless you've seen someone shot with a gun. And I saw that once out there around 12, 15 in downtown LA. Unless you've actually seen someone shot with a gun, you don't know what it can do. You can watch movies and all this other stuff, but I'm not saying that every student has to have a life experience. One of my black belts has an electric knife. And I don't know how expensive. He treats it very tenderly. He says we can't really use it in the dojo because if you drop it, it'll break and then it doesn't work anymore. But depending on how it is electronically set, if it touches you, it feels like a knife cut.
Those are really neat.
Those are really neat, but you can't put them into simulations or situations that would be what you could do with a rubber knife, a wooden knife, a marks a lot, not permanent marker, but all these things a person knows it's not real. Now, one thing I will say for those of you who use wooden knives, because I had it happen once in my dojo at the junior high, the wooden knives, I use wooden knives because rubber knives are more expensive and they'll break after, if I get a rubber knife, it'll break within one class or two classes at the hilt. Wooden knives, they don't break. They only have two safety hazards. One, I insist the kids keep hold of the knife so it doesn't go flying off into the sunset and hit someone else, because that hurts. And the other thing is, the junior had one kid who stopped a wooden knife coming straight up with the palm of his hand, and it ripped his hand open. And fortunately, there was no, they had to do stitches, and et cetera. Fortunately, it did no nerve damage. But now, whenever I use a wooden knife, I'll sand down the end of it, the edge, the tip of it, so that it's dull. Because they will cut. And that student had a great deal of respect for a wooden knife after that incident. But you have, how do you say it? Students have to have, as I don't know, Rishna said, they have to have empathy. They have to understand what a weapon can do. They have to understand what their martial art can do. And that allows you as a sensei to determine whether they are, maybe this is the way it goes, they are worthy of learning what you can't teach them. I don't know if that makes any sense. Because they don't have empathy, they don't have feelings. They're not going to care what they do.
And that depends on the setting too.
Yes, and that
because if you're going through boot camp training in the military, it doesn't matter, because you're being trained to go out there and maximize damage or whatever, you're being sent for. I think most of us, if not all of us, learned it learned martial arts from instructors, specifically probably Japanese martial arts, right? And we learned, when we learned it, there was do, so do is a path. It's a journey. You have jitsu, which is kind of the technique and the skill, and then you have do, which is a path. So more military type of, we don't care, how you think, and if you're a bad person, good person, we just need you to do a job. You teach them the techniques and have them practice it, become good, and then send them off to do their job. But probably the way we learned it came with a philosophy, and that was the do. And the philosophy really is beyond and sometimes outside of martial arts. It's a life philosophy. It's a path to something, self-betterment, enlightenment, becoming a better person, becoming more helpful in society, bringing peace. And then martial arts was the delivery mechanism, to move you along that path. So how you practice the techniques, what environment you practiced it, and how you practiced and applied it was in line with that philosophy. And if you were out of line from that philosophy, then you either wouldn't be taught, depending on the instructor and the circumstance, or you would be taught differently. And to me, that's how I think of it. Is I have a philosophy too, and I want to accomplish something, through the training, and I use martial arts, not just for self-defense, but physical fitness, mental stability, intelligence, reflexes, all these things, but it's just a different way to practice to an end goal. And the end goal, the bigger goal, is not just the successful application of techniques in self-defense, but it's that where that philosophy is taking you to. I think that could be accomplished through non-martial arts types of training too. And if you look at the Japanese culture specifically, you'll see, you could be a sword maker, you could be a clay maker, you could be a gardener, but they follow a similar philosophy, but they just apply, different types of practices and techniques for that end goal. I just happen to like martial arts because it checks a lot of boxes for me. So I use that because I've seen the effects of my life and other people's life. I like that mechanism to be on that, to get me to stay on that path and to get to where I'd like to be. But it's not the only way. So if we, as teachers, whether we're consciously or subconsciously thinking that, because we probably are one way or the other, it translates to how we behave and what we do and the choices we make, in the dojo. So that empathy is important, but the question is why, right? Why is it important? Because we prescribe to a philosophy, whether we're aware of it or not. Otherwise, who cares, right? Just teach them everything. Let's have fun. And, some people consider beating each other up fun. Others don't want to get hurt. I don't know, whatever, it's the philosophy, I think, that determines whether somebody's in line, out of line, along the path, or going a different direction. And all your decisions are going to be based on that.
Okay, makes sense to me. I mean, Seki, who he had a tendency to be an SOB on the mat. And I mean that as a compliment. But he also had a very strong philosophy of nonviolence, of accommodation, of helping people. Off the mat, the guy had a heart of gold. He was very patient, particularly off the mat. His attitude was that you do not fight people. Fighting is the most getting into a fight, a physical confrontation, is the most degrading thing you can do as a human being. And I had problems with my students at times, particularly junior high. I said, you don't fight, you help people go where they want to go. It's a mindset. You help people. And when I was in court years ago, the kid who had swung at me and hit my glasses, which made it, in California, that made it felony assault. And he was ultimately spent, I think, 6 months or a year with the California Youth Authority. And and I really felt sorry for the kid, but Seki's attitude was and I try to, because you help people go in the direction they want to go. And this has to do, you can get into this is ki or other Japanese terminology. And ki can have, or chi can have a lot of different meanings depending on the situation. Okay. If you can nurture a plant to grow well into gardening, you develop the plant's ki or spirit. Okay. And you get a reward out of that by helping the plant achieve its ki or chi. If a person swings at you, you help him go in the direction he wanted to go. And in that court trial, I actually used that as part of my testimony. And the judge bought it. Because you have to be able, one of the things that I was able to get my students to understand is you have to be able to explain what you have done. And that maybe goes back to Briston saying, if you don't have empathy, you can't explain because you don't get the concept. So maybe only those people who have empathy are worthy of the knowledge we give to them. Ultimately. And we thin them out either directly and initially, as Thomas has done, as I've done, as Briston has done, and I'm sure everyone else has done to some extent. First class or two, we weed them out if we suspect something, or because they don't stick around to put in the time and realize that learning is a process, not a end result. And they accept that process. They accept that it's going to be, they have to adopt a certain philosophy in order to succeed. If you have the knowledge that you can do a lot of damage to a human being, which most of us do have, each of us can easily cripple a person or kill them. I have one student who, and he was a black belt at the time. He was walking through a park at night, which he admitted was not the smart thing to do. One of his friends came up behind him, wanted to find out what he could do. And for a rear forearm choke, he threw him, hip throw. His kid ended up with permanent brain damage. Now he carries that with him and he feels very bad about it. Even though it wasn't his fault. But he had empathy, because most people, when they hurt someone, they have empathy. They realize they've injured another human being, and that's hard for a lot of people to accept, even in the military. And maybe that's what makes a person worthy. Thank you, Briston. I learned something today. Thank you, Tom. Anyway, okay, we have our first junk call of the day. Okay, hold on for a second. It's actually a real call. Just bear with me. Second. Hello? Just a moment. Be right back.
Do any of you teach your children? How many of you are fathers, and have you tried to teach your kids? Yeah.
Anyway,
It went into an interesting direction. He started out with traditional jiu-jitsu. Actually, I tried to get him into judo, but he didn't like it. So eventually he got into Aikido, then jiu-jitsu. And from jiu-jitsu, he got back into judo, loved it. And he is basically leaving the what do we call it? The formal martial arts alone, and just mainly concentrating on judo, BJJ, and competitive wrestling, and questions the effectiveness of Aikido and Jiu-Jitsu.
Interesting.
But he's 20 years old. He was in his late teens when he went into that phase. So
Well, see, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
yeah,
I
no,
apologize.
no problem. He's young. He's got a lot of energy, and this is how he deals with it.
Yeah. I have 3 sons and I teach them, and I use the mat to help raise them, really. So I'll use jujitsu as an analogy, if mostly with problem solving. It's like, if this isn't working, then what do you do on the mat? You try something different, like, or the jujitsu philosophy of not meeting force with force, redirecting it, getting out of its way,
Mhm.
but that's why I asked, because I feel like that's connected to what we're talking about a little bit. I use jujitsu to help raise my kids, to teach my sons
Mhm.
ethics,
Well,
and
he's gotten that out of jiu-jitsu, but he's also fortunately got that out of judo, because he works with a really good group of people, very respectful, and yeah, and also he's been in situations where he's had to defend himself, and has done it verbally without without a physical confrontation. He was gonna get attacked by 5 guys, and talked his way out of it, which was pretty impressive. Although in the
yeah.
back of his mind, he feels like I could have taken him on. He's got that type of spirit. Didn't show any fear, and just held his hands up, says don't want to fight, but was still in that fighting stance. And fortunately, it didn't go the other direction.
I'm glad you brought this up, because this is,
Mhm.
I know when I first started in jiu-jitsu, when you went to your ready position, it was, 2 fists
Mhm.
and something, you got all these variations of the 2 fists. And then, I forget who it was mentioned to me, it creates the illusion that you want to fight.
Mhm. Right.
But if you put your hands out and say, I don't want to fight, what can we do to resolve this? Regardless of what's going on up here, it creates the illusion that you don't want to fight. And the fact that that person had enough self-confidence to pull that off, your ability to use it to say, I don't want to fight. You can have a tone of voice that infers, I really don't want to fight.
Mhm.
But if I have to defend myself, there's going to be some, for lack of a better phrase, there's going to be some shit to pay.
Mhm.
I may not walk away from this undamaged, but and it's a matter of having that, as you said, Ned, the body position, the look in that person's your friend's face, set tone of his voice, all these, and I'm sure Christian knows this from law enforcement. A lot of it is in your tone of voice and how you address the person. And it doesn't mean, and you have to be respectful. All these things have to come into play. And it shows, Kristen, I'm going to pick on you again. It showed that even in this situation, you have empathy.
Mhm.
Okay. Because empathy can play out in a lot of different ways. Because you're kind of sure, I don't want to get in a physical confrontation with you. Darren. So what's
Sensei,
from you on this? You've been very quiet. Busy week?
yeah, it's been busy, but all good. All good.
Any thoughts or?
I think we've gone off into so many different directions. I've had plenty of thoughts through some of the dialogue back and forth. I thought we started off with one specific topic, and we've, as we normally do, went off into a bunch of different directions. But everything that I've been hearing is pretty good. My only I guess add to right now is to continue to, if we were to circle back to the original topic, would be, and I say I, but I mean I as in collectively all of us, if we feel like somebody is not the type of person that we want to teach technique to, why do we even let them in the program? And then I heard some of the feedback from Chris and from Thomas, and understanding their dynamic of, being in a community area where they have to be able to continue to teach. And I think you're in one of them spots too as well, Sensei. But there's things that we could do to make sure that person doesn't come back around. And I think they've expressed that. So agreed with all of that.
Yeah, I agree. There are, I've had a couple of situations where I've had a student who has, if you injure a person once, okay, it happened. Students get injured. But if you're injuring a student a couple times or 3 times within a short period of time, at that point, I will pull this, if it's usually after the second one, I'll pull the student aside and say, you really need to be more careful. You need to, you need to hold back on what you're doing, because if you don't know it by now, these techniques are designed to ultimately disable and injure your attacker. And it goes back, on the one hand, do they have empathy for the situation? Do they have empathy for what they're doing? Are they aware of what they're doing? Does it bother them? All these other things come into play. And that is I think why I've concentrated so much now on empathy, is because that is what we use. That is maybe how we measure whether a person is worthy of moving on. And that I think that can be applied to any profession too. I mean, if you see a person who you're working with and they have a real desire to do something correctly and they're open to learning, they'll take your suggestions, or whatever else. But it's a matter of, you see, they have empathy, so you have empathy for them. And I'm not trying to be facetious here. We can all empathize with each other on this issue. I mean, we can all agree, yes, having empathy is important, and even that is an act of empathy. And maybe that's what we look at in a person to determine whether they're worthy of staying in the program. And that's why sometimes, with students, you may say if they come and they're having a bad night, they're being overly aggressive, you can say, I'd like you to just go sit down for 20 minutes and either think about what's going on or relax, or just watch the class for a little bit. When I was a classroom teacher, we weren't supposed to let kids outside of the room. I mean, God knows they'd walk off. But I'd usually say to a student, if there were a problem, I'll say, I'd like you just to go stand outside the door for a few minutes. And when you think you're ready to come back in, come back in. And sometimes they'd be out there for 10, 15 minutes, and I'd periodically check on them. Or after a couple minutes, they'd come back in and everything would be okay. Students can realize when they've screwed up or done something that they shouldn't have, unless they don't have empathy. for the situation. But anyway, I think if we go back to, like some people get upset that I make the densho available. And I think at some point I actually sent each of my black belts a copy of the densho. I don't know what they've done with it. Some of them may have it just added it to their collection of stuff. And some may actually be using it and trying to, figure out the techniques. And if they put in the effort to cross-reference it to either the videos and or the books, they can probably put my terminology together and learn other techniques. But that takes intent and interest and desire to learn on their part, which are all things that we as sensei are looking for in them. And I've had on occasion people say, on technique 456, I've tried this, I can't. What am I doing wrong? So, sometimes the knowledge, as I've also said, the knowledge is out there. Or as what was the TV show, The Truth Is Out There, with the UFOs and what was those? Be 10, 15 years ago now. Male and female FBI agents.
I think you're thinking of the X-Files.
The X-Files. The truth is out there. And some people are and that's what we're all after. Right, Chris? And the truth is out there. And we're because of our martial arts background, we're still looking for it. And we may have found parts of it, but that encourages us to look further, maybe into ourselves or what we're doing or whatever else. And maybe that's what makes us worthy. I don't know. Okay. We got 15 minutes here. Do we want to delve into is speed important in effective technique execution? We want to delve into that topic, or
We should be able to get through that pretty quickly.
good play on words.
Come on, I've waited all morning for that one, George.
Okay.
Contrary to the question, he did that pretty quick.
Very good, Thomas. Okay. I appreciate people with a really good, subtle sense of humor, because you end up having to laugh at yourself. Anyway, very good. It is, is speed important for effective technique execution?
You broke it down into 2 points. One was in the dojo for testing, and one was on the street. In testing, it seems like most of the time I'm telling the student to slow down. I want to see good form. I don't want to see them go too fast, because people go too fast, people get hurt. On the street, we want people to get hurt. Sorry, I'm not supposed to say that, am I?
No, you're helping them. You're not hurting them. You're helping them go where they
Right,
want.
I'm helping them. Okay.
And they got hurt because they didn't know how to land or whatever. So they resisted what you were doing. She said that mindset I have from you got to help people, not hurt them. And I don't know whether that develops a lack of empathy. I don't know. And anyway, let's get back to. So you're saying that on the street, techniques do have to be done perhaps more quickly than they are in the dojo.
I think they're going to be done more quickly on the street, whether the student considers doing that or not. I think the situation just pumps up the adrenaline, and the student's going to go faster. If their technique is really good at a moderate pace, it'll be adequate at a faster pace when they're not thinking about it.
Okay, I'm glad you said adequate. Okay.
In my experience, if you practice a technique over and over again and get it down, at different levels of intensity, you can feel, that it's going to work or not work. Okay. And if I do a technique very fast and on the way, I feel something's going to go wrong, I just let it go. Okay. That's in practice. And of course we want to, practice the techniques at different intensities. I just think that repetition is important, for safety, and to understand that, if the technique feels wrong, you can't just move forward with it till the end. No.
Right. And I think as Brishton said earlier with his sons, if something isn't working, that's a problem. How do you resolve it? And you probably will, depending on your level of knowledge, you may realize one thing isn't working, but there's something else I can now get to that, and I may not be doing the same technique anymore, but I can solve the problem by going to a different technique. And
Right.
you're
Yeah.
you're helping your son become a problem solver rather than complaining about the problem.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, as far as like speed goes and bringing up my sons kind of brings me to an interesting point. I'm giving him my jujitsu. It's the same jujitsu, but it's manifested differently in him because he is so much faster than me. So he favors different techniques. So speed is like an attribute. And the whole time I was coming up in jujitsu, oh, Briston, you're just really strong. It was like an insult, you know, that, my jujitsu wasn't technical. I'm just strong. It was like a way of being dismissive of me. And, I see your physical attributes as, that's just going to manifest itself in your jujitsu. You can't help but, bring what tools you have to bear when you're using your art,
Right.
And I mean, that's not exactly what we're talking about. I think we're talking about relying on speed and training. I think if you can do something slow and controlled in the mat, it should be easy to do it quick.
Yeah.
And if all you're doing is technique lightning fast when you're training, you're going to miss the finer points of balance associated with tipping somebody over for a throw or a sweep or the finer details of securing a joint lock.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I will tell students that I've had students with a lot of muscle, and I say, muscle is an asset. It's like, and it's the same level as learning how to do the technique correctly. If you can use muscle to make a technique more effective, but if you don't understand the technique, you're just using muscle, which doesn't mean you're going to be effective.
Right.
It's like if you have a gun, a gun is nice, but did you turn, is the safety on or off? At the high school I was at, we had I probably mentioned it sometime, we had one kid brought a 32 caliber automatic to school. And the kid that was supposed to bring me ammo brought 22s.
Yeah, mention that.
And Bristol's kind of looking like, someone's missing a few millimeters of brain. Anyway, but if you have the technical understanding, the muscle works better. Okay. And part of our martial arts training is to train us to use what we have most effectively. So I would never knock you for having muscle or just being strong.
Well,
As long as you're learning the technique, I would probably say you don't need, practice the technique without using muscle. Get the technique. Then if you're in a situation and the muscle comes into play, the muscle comes into play.
Yeah.
Because you can't prevent it anyway. I have one of the things that again, when I taught junior high or women's self-defense, I say you need to be as verbally abusive as you can to your attacker. If two guys are having an argument, nobody's going to pay attention if they start swearing at each other. But if a woman is confronted by a man or, touched inappropriately, and you start using foul language at the top of your lungs, you're going to attract attention. And that's what you're after. Okay. And that's because that's the way our society is. So you have to use what assets you have. And as Ned said, using your voice, the hands, probably got him out of that situation. Because that was an asset he had. Okay. And we all tend to use our voice in one way or another to get what we want.
What's interesting is he didn't learn that in judo or BJJ.
No, I'm not saying you do. It may be just that's part of his personality.
No, his argument is that they're more effective than traditional martial arts or jiu-jitsu taught in a traditional way. But when it came down to it, the avoidance was the most effective technique.
Right. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Mhm.
Yeah. If you can avoid the physical conflict and walk away, I'm not going to say you've won, but you certainly haven't lost.
I think Aikido does a really good job of that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, some martial arts, and I'm not going to say the martial art. I think because as you brought up, Kristen, it's usually the instructor's attitude. If you're doing a good job as a sensei, you're teaching an attitude as well as a martial art. You're teaching a certain mindset, you're teaching a certain empathy, you're teaching a lot of other things other than, oh, he can do a great roundhouse, or he can do a wonderful snap kick, or he can do a really nice koshinagi. Okay. Or he did a wonderful job of breaking that student's wrist. I'm being facetious here. But it's kind of like when I in the past, when I taught law enforcement, I told them, because there's public around, you always want to sound as polite as possible. And try not to use expletives, which is hard. Okay. And I said, anytime you're giving a command, if you can insert the word please and make sure it's loud and clear, it creates a better quote unquote public image. Now, you might, while you're using the word please, you might be applying a little extra pressure on the lock, but nobody sees that. So, it's how do you say it? It's there, we as instructors our attitude goes, students will pick up on that. And they'll learn that certain attitudes, you know, if a person has a certain attitude, they get treated a certain way. I learned early on in my teaching career because some of the students I had, and because it was a really tough school, I learned to watch, if they were gang members, to watch their eyes, because their eye movements and eyelid movements told me a lot about what they were thinking. And then I could either give them a similar, well, I could give them a look back, which is say, I read what you're saying, and we don't want to go there. And you don't have to say anything. And Briston may know this. You're in law enforcement, I assume, with this. Yeah.
Yes.
You can do engage in a lot of nonverbal communication if you know how the other person communicates.
My friend Matt says I'm the world's worst poker player. It's all over my face.
Yeah, playing poker is a good way to know whether you've got a good skill set in, you know, people's expressions. Okay. Anyway, I think we've taken care of this topic, and I think at this point we're at 9:28, and or thereabouts. So I think we're going to stop at this point. I'm still having some technical difficulties with the video, so I hope to get this up by the end of the weekend, and I hope to have the technical glitches resolved. And in any case, our next meeting will be on December 5th, and there will only be one meeting next month because of the holidays. And I know some of you will be out desperately Christmas shopping, or, you know, decorating the Christmas tree or the Hanukkah bush or whatever else you have. My dad one year facetiously put up a Hanukkah bush. Just anyhow, so a little Christmas bush tree with blue and white lights. Anyway, it's humor, I guess, for some. Okay, anyway, so in any case, we'll meet again on December 5th. If you have any topics, I know of 3 topics we will be covering, maybe. And I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Me too.
Thanks, George.
One thing you might do, if you can, if you're getting together with family or you are hosting the host, find someone who doesn't have any place to go on Thanksgiving and invite them over. Number one, they really appreciate it. Number two, if you have a family that is politically or philosophically divided, this will tend to put them on better behavior because they don't want to offend the guest. And those are probably two good reasons. You know, one year I had someone down from Canada. We invited them to Thanksgiving, and they discovered some foods they had never had before. And it was a learning experience for them. So, you know, it's amazing what, and different cultures have different things for Thanksgiving too. So if they want to bring something, go for it. It does make for an actually a more enjoyable and more interesting Thanksgiving. And this person really appreciates it. And it probably makes you feel good too. So in any case, that's my Thanksgiving wish. So, and enjoy the turkey or ham or beef, whatever you have. Keep in mind that a bit of history here. pilgrims that came over. 4'6" was tall. And most of the indigenous population was significantly taller than they were. So don't believe the movies you see or the pictures, you know, it's just, once the people from Europe got to America and their diets improved, if you're first, probably doesn't happen too much anymore, but many times if you're the first generation American, you will be taller than your parents, simply because you've had better food growing up than your parents may have. So that's you know, most of us 4 kids were taller than our birth parents and all their friends. So it's just something, you know, history has some interesting little plays to it. Anyhow, have a great Thanksgiving. Have a good weekend. Don't do anything dangerous. Christians, stay safe. And Chris, good to have you back. Darren, good to have you back. Thomas, thank you for being a more regular. And I hope we get some more people next time. And again, Thomas, I do apologize for, I think some people just read the first page, and when it said postponed to 12/5, some people thought there wasn't that today's meeting wasn't going to happen. So but we
still had a good group.
Yes, we still had a good group. Okay, take care.
All right. Bye all.
Happy
Don't
Thanksgiving,
eat too
everyone.
much turkey.
You too.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. You too.